Cool. All right. Well, welcome back to Life Examined. We're doing another video, and we're doing one quite quickly after the last one. That makes sense in these times. So we're doing a lot more stuff from home. Life Examined. We are a group of philosophers that get together, and our main objective is to help people reflect on their philosophical ethos. And philosophical ethos is just the philosophical ground that leads to how we make choices in life. So we think that people's well-being will be improved if they are self-reflective and they think about what they think about the world. They reflect on it. So that's what we're all about. And I'm Joshua Bronson, and I'm a philosopher, and I live in Gothenburg.
My name is Matthew Nowachek, and I am also a philosopher living here in Lund.
And my name's Miriam van der Valk, and I'm also in Gothenburg. And today what we're doing is we're going to pretend to be Socrates a little bit by asking open-ended questions about what things mean, and then trying to help each other check our own statements. To say something like, is that really consistent with what you said before?
Yeah.
Questions like that. That's how we're going to do it today. And the thing is, Matt and I don't really know what Joshua is going to bring up today, because he
No,
has
we
a secret
don't.
topic. So
This is a bit scary.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
This could be a 2-minute Socratic discussion here.
Yeah, the thing is, we always say we're going to try to keep things short, and then it's just not possible.
No.
Because there are always so many questions, but that's what we're going to do today. We're going to ask these questions. Joshua's bringing something up, and we're going to ask philosophical questions, and with the aim of increasing the wisdom, our collective wisdom, so everyone's wisdom. So we're trying to find the universal principle in what's being said, something that we can apply to another situation. That's sort of the aim of the matter, and that is what reflection is.
Yeah.
To look at what you're going through in your personal life right now and see like the umbrella principle that we can apply to something else. So that's what we're trying to do.
And if I could just jump in there, Miriam, the tagline for Life Examined is live interactive philosophy.
Yes.
So we're going to do this live. We're going to do it interactively. There's a deal of improvisation involved, so we'll just see where it leads us. Josh?
Nice. That was exactly what I was going to say. Live interactive philosophy. Yeah. So if you didn't get a chance to listen to our previous talk, which was just last week, you can see a link. There'll be a link somewhere. I'm sure we can do that. And you can go back and check it out. And that was a really great discussion. We were talking about morality in the coronavirus crisis. And it was a good discussion. One of the things that we talked about during that brought up an idea to me. We had mentioned that in this current crisis, one of the interesting aspects of it is how much information is available, but how difficult it is to get any sense of cohesion or any one picture out of it, because we get a lot of conflicting messages. So this reminded me of a kind of a classic. So there's a classic problem. This was written mostly by a philosopher named Alston, which doesn't really matter, in the late 1990s. So, but it's this good combination of three different ideas that when we think about it, they seem to make perfect sense, but then together they create a kind of conflict. And this is a real typical thing in philosophy. It's great to bring up things that when we first hear it, we think, yeah, that makes good sense. And then when you put them all together, you feel like, no, they don't go together. So these are the three principles, and then we'll talk about. I'll throw it back to Matthew and Miriam and see if we can get some connections to our situation today. So they go like this. The first one is that when something is true, we should believe it. That's the first statement, and that seems to make sense. Why does that make sense? Well, a simple example. Take something like modus ponens, which is a simple logical truth, which is that if P, then Q. If you have P, then you get Q. And if you understand English, you follow the logic there, then it seems like you should believe that it is true. So the first thing is that if something is true, we should believe it. And that should there is a kind of it's kind of similar to like the way we talk about laws, right? That if the rule is a certain way, then you should behave in a certain way. And this is like a rule of reason. If the rule of reason is a certain way, then you should believe it. The second principle is ought implies can. So if you ought to do something, the implication is that you can do it. If you can't do something at all, then it seems very strange to say that you should or that you ought to. So, for example, like it would be very odd for me to say, well, you should, tell Matthew, he's down in Lund, but I should say, you should fly up here, not on an airplane, but by your own power. And that's strange because obviously Matthew can't fly on his own power. So
I can't, but Superman can. No,
Superman can. Exactly. Yeah.
You're right. Yes, I can't.
Yeah. So ought implies can. So the first one was that when something is true, we should believe it. And the second is that ought implies can. And the third is that our beliefs, it appears, are not under our voluntary control. So it seems like we can't just choose to believe something. And why do people think that's the case? Well, here's a good example. So if I say to Matthew and Miriam right now, I say, look, I've got 10,000 crowns, 100,000 crowns. I'll give 100,000 crowns to the first person that can believe that Norway owns Sweden. Right? And it's like, you might really want 100,000 crowns, but it doesn't seem like it's open to us to just decide to believe that Norway owns Sweden.
Right.
So it seems like our beliefs aren't just open to us to force in any particular direction. But if those three things can't be true together, because they create a contradiction. So that seems quite interesting to me in relationship to what we're going through right now in terms of COVID-19 and how we should navigate a world where there are lots and lots of opinions put forward, and we've got to try to figure out both what to believe and what to do. So I'll throw that back to you guys, and let's see what comes out of this.
Oh, I love this, and I love talking about our beliefs about the world.
Yeah.
And ways to determine truth. I'm really happy that this came up. I have no idea where this discussion will end, but these are super interesting topics.
I mean, we can maybe start by giving a little map here. I mean, we've got this. We're talking about epistemology, about knowledge, what we can know. We're talking about truth.
Yeah.
I'm interested in point number 3 there in particular, when you're talking about the beliefs are not under our voluntary control. And I guess the question is, why not? What's involved in that process? And I immediately thought of ideas of counter evidence. So what you're talking about is that I cannot just force myself to believe that Norway owns Sweden. And the reason for that is because I have all this counter evidence that won't allow me to do that. But that doesn't mean there aren't people who could believe that. But there would be different systems of evidence involved and a different story that they're using in order to get to that conclusion. But I am coming from the particular discourse that I can't believe that. I can't choose to believe that.
Can there be things that are true that nobody believes? I mean, there are. Surely we can imagine that there are true things about the universe.
Yeah.
Or like the sea, or like the human body and the way cells work, etc. That are completely true, but nobody believes them. We don't know anything about them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, good example from last time we talked to Miriam, you brought this up about washing your hands. Before, I mean, no one believed that there were these small, invisible little forces that were infecting people's bodies and killing them before the discussion of bacteria and all of that came up in microbiology. So in some sense, people didn't believe that, but they eventually came to believe it, given the expansion of sort of their categories of knowledge.
Yes, because the first premise was that if it's true, you ought to believe it. You should believe it. So how do we determine the truth? This is so
Yeah, that's going to be one of the critical questions that comes up, is then how do you determine what is true? But maybe we could slightly rephrase, because I mean that's a paraphrasing of how the arguments go. But we could maybe rephrase that. So one question is definitely about how do we determine what is true, but you could also put it in a slightly different way. You could say that you should believe what you are epistemic justification for.
Yeah.
What you have good reason,
right,
to believe. And that might be slightly different, because you might have good epistemic justification for something which is not true. And then that becomes a quite tricky balance between the knower's perspective and what's true in the world. So you were asking, Miriam, are there true things in the world that nobody believes? And of course there are, because there are some things that we don't know, like we don't know what the largest prime number is, but presumably there is one. And presumably if we knew what it was, then we would believe that that was the largest prime number. Right? So something that there are right. So there are things that we don't know. There may be things that we are unable to know, truths that we are unable to know, and therefore we're not able to believe them because we can't even begin to conceive of them. But yeah, but then there's there's a distinction there between justified justification, so good reason to believe something.
But for instance, in coaching, we will spend some time to find out what a person's beliefs are.
Yeah.
And there it's quite clear. It turns out that you have beliefs that you weren't aware of.
Yeah.
You know, and you have beliefs about like your place in the world, and also how the world works, whether there are like whether somebody is trying to manipulate you, you know, or whether I'm saying I'm not really sure where I'm going with this, but I have like an idea. So let's say we have a situation, at least in social media, because I don't watch the news, so I don't even know what's going on there. But in social media, we know that there are people who are claiming things and are saying that other people's beliefs are false.
Right.
You know, this is a big claim. You believe the wrong thing.
Right.
And so maybe a first step would be asking, what are your reasons or something? Or something like that. Do you see what I'm saying? Because it means that there's like a connection between truth and belief.
Right.
There is a connection between truth and belief. But what is it, and what does it mean to be true? Like purely, like it's not enough. I mean, intuitively we know it's not enough to say it's true to me. You know, it's my personal truth that it's because this is not, or like it's true because so many people say that it's true. I mean, truth is also it's not entirely personal, and it's not like a democracy vote. You can't vote like what will be true today. The truth has some other quality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. That the quality of the truth, of the beliefs are not necessarily influenced by the quantity. I'm thinking of this hilarious story that Kierkegaard tells about the 3-cent beer seller. He buys beer for 4 cents a bottle, and then he sells it for 3. And the guy sitting in the bar says, well, how do you make a profit on that? and he says, well, it's the volume, it's the number I sell that makes the difference. And Kierkegaard's point there is that somehow we get confused, or we get sort of dazed by large numbers, and we think that if there's a lot of views or a lot of people saying this, even if it's bad, therefore it somehow makes a qualitative jump into being true. Yeah. But just the fact that there's tons of people saying this doesn't make it a good belief. There's different reasons or different things involved in the justification of those beliefs. There are some beliefs that are better than others. I mean, conspiracy theories are a great example of this, because there's a certain train of reason or thought that gets us to say that these beliefs are good and therefore justified, and therefore we know that this is the case, whatever conspiracy theory it is. But at some point we have to call into question the chain of reasoning that gets us there, the justification behind that.
That's really, I just read this morning a good example of exactly what you're talking about. So there is a and I don't remember the name, but there's a doctor in the U.S. who recently so they're treating COVID-19, right? And one of the primary ways that people are treating it is as if it's a respiratory problem, a respiratory disease. And I don't know enough about the medical stuff, right? But they're treating it in a particular way. And one of the ways that they're doing it is using ventilators to force air into lungs. And the idea is that the lungs are in a particular state. So this is the assumption. The assumption is that COVID-19 leads to a particular kind of disease that needs to be treated in a particular way. Well, this particular doctor thought that there was some strange things in the way that this treatment was working in the ICU, that people's saturation of oxygen in their lungs was lower than it should be, and that sometimes it decreased when they were put on a ventilator rather than increasing, which he thought was strange. So he thought that maybe it should be treated more like what happens when you are diving and you come up too quickly and you get the vent, it's called. So he thought that it would be a different approach. It doesn't matter what the details are. Right? There's a consensus view, roughly, around the world about how to try and treat COVID-19. And he thinks that it's missing something. And so he wants to try to do something differently. And this is really interesting in terms of the number of people, right? So if a large number of doctors around the world are thinking that we should do one thing, does that make it true? Well, obviously not, because the underlying case might not be the way that it's thought of.
Yes.
Right.
I have a similar story. I think it's from Einstein. I was told this the other day when he proposed his great theory, or one of them. There were 30 other scientists who signed like a petition against it.
Yeah.
And he said one would be enough. You know, if you have one person who can actually disprove it, we don't need any more. You know, so see, and that's kind of the majority vote. Like how many believe, you know, and then if it's a majority, then that's it's so fascinating. I think it's so fascinating. Yeah.
So if numbers aren't sufficient for justification of a belief to say that this is a good reason to say this is a good belief, because lots of other people believe it. What other criteria are we looking to say, well, this is a good belief? This is a belief that is justified, that will therefore lead us to knowledge. What other criteria are we looking at? If it works.
Yeah, if it works.
Pragmatism. But now we've got a couple different things going on, right? So one question is the relationship between justification and belief. And then on the other side, we've got a question about whether or not you're able to believe. If you have the voluntary, if you're able, if there should be a should, right? So Einstein we might say something like this: Einstein has a theory, and there is no theory yet that destroys certain parts of it. So we should believe it to be true. That should there is an ought, right? It's the idea is that if you understand something of the theory, and you don't have any, like you were pointing out, Matthew, you don't have any conflicting counter evidence.
Right.
Then you should, right? You should believe that there's an obligation. It's your duty. If you understand it, then you should believe that it is true.
But as soon as you find counter evidence, like for instance, if when Einstein has, I'm just making things up now, but you can see the metaphor. But so if Einstein has this thought experiment, what would it be like if I was sitting on a ray of light and suddenly something pops up and he goes, it doesn't comply with the rules the way we know them.
Yeah.
You know? And then if you have this kind of doubt, then it's your moral obligation to go down that road.
Right.
You know?
Right. Moral obligation. Yeah. I mean, it's your duty. It's your duty as a knower, as an epistemic agent. But that all assumes that you're able to.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Right. You're able to adjust your belief to fit your evidence to put it in those terms, right? And then the question is whether or not we are.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we mean then when we say, for example, be reasonable or be rational. What we're saying is, I mean, what David Hume says in his inquiry, he says that a wise person will proportion his or her beliefs after the evidence. You'll make your conclusion based on the evidence, and that's what we mean when we say be reasonable.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yeah.
And this is also the like every psychologist person or interested person will know that you can have so much insight about why you do the things that you do and why you search out the people that are harmful to you, even though you know that it won't work, for instance. Or if you have like the same type of argument over and over with your partner, and you recognize it, but somehow you have a belief about relationships or a belief about what you deserve, you know?
Sure. So like there could be a conflict, you mean?
Yeah.
So on one level, like on one level you might have a certain proposition that this is technical terms, but you have a certain statement that you would agree to, right? You might say something like, I should not do this. I should not eat 15 donuts. You know that. You know that in the sense that you agree to it. But then when it comes to a different level, when you're sitting there and there's donuts in front of you, your action ends up following from another set of beliefs that aren't directly connected to that higher level statement.
And there are I heard the other day that pharmacy sales of products that help you quit smoking the sales went up something like 70 or 80%, like during Corona now.
Yeah.
So this is also a type of belief, you know. Suddenly a smoker will have the belief that it might really make a difference to the capacity of my lungs, you know, even if you haven't had this belief before. See,
sure. And that's really interesting, because then the question is, so putting it back into those terms of those three things, right? I mean, is that belief something which is, do they have control over the belief? And what do they?
What happened? What made the belief change? That's the question. Yeah. So what did truth make the belief change? Or I mean, because I mean, how? Or is the belief what determines our subjective understanding of the truth level? You see, like how do we even reach the universal objective truth? This is still the question.
But I mean, when you start talking about control, I mean, that's can we control it? That's a really complicated question, because there's a lot of parts involved in that. I mean, when we talk, it's not just that I am an individual who is faced with these two choices, and that I make a choice between them. There's a discourse or a context, a community in which I find myself, which is already helping determine and help me decide which one of these things is reasonable. So I mean, if we take a group, a cult or a closed-in group that has a consistent set of beliefs and worldview within that group, then maybe it would be, in fact, very easy for me to say, I can't control, I just believe X or Y or Z. If you're outside of that group, you would say, I cannot believe X, Y, or Z. Right. I can't do it. It's out of my control. Which shows that there's a different there are different influences involved in what it means to actually say we can or cannot control what we believe, which is a whole nother layer there, which is really important. There's layers of the social aspect. There's layers of self-deception involved in that as well.
I mean, that's really interesting, putting that in terms of like a narrative or like a cultural narrative as well, that there's multiple levels. There's a lot of different things going on. It reminds me a little bit of Wittgenstein's illustration of the riverbed, and his point with this was that you can't doubt everything. You have to keep some things stable. So the sides of the river, if you think of the riverbed as your knowledge of the world, that the sides of the river can alter. You can change course over time, but you can't take away the whole thing. Otherwise, nothing moves. So it's like there's some things that you have to take to be stable, in order to sort of go forward. But and then that, I mean, like Miriam, like your point, I mean, some of that's the subjective, the way in which certain beliefs sit subjectively in your worldview. But then that's really great, because this connects to another article I read this morning, because I got forwarded to by a work colleague, and it's a really good one. It's about truth, exactly about truth. And one of the things he was pointing out is that there's different kinds of truth. Some truths you might say are, well, it depends on how you use truth, but some truths are socially constructed truths, like you should drive on the left side of the road or the right side of the road, and so on. And some truths are objective beyond our control, like the largest prime number and so on. But one of his main points in this article was that most of the way that we get our information about truth today is dictated by a very small number of companies, and that the shift has gone from traditional truth centers like universities and governments to being essentially algorithms by tech companies. And what's interesting about that is, like you were mentioning, Matthew, about like a cult, and there's something really interesting about the personalization way that these algorithms shape the news that we get or social media. So if you might have rational justification to believe X, whatever it is, because everything that you see when you're interacting with the way that you get your information reaffirms this particular proposition.
Right.
But the thing is, the amazing thing about that is that you have no insight into the way that that's generated, because it's generated by an algorithm, for one, and because those algorithms are private property, i.e. they're owned by private companies. We can't see how that information is put together. And that's...
So in some sense, we have these large digital cults of sorts, where we have internally consistent worldviews. We have beliefs that hold together, but they may not, in fact, be very good beliefs or justified beliefs in a larger framework.
Yeah.
And then I remember from the literature on philosophy for children, one thing that always comes up is that we are usually, like kids at school, are taught the end product of great inventors' work, but you're not taught the process. To get in there, which is the same point as with the Einstein, the idea that he gets, and then that he has to go and test it. And this is what we do in our truth finding work, Like I said that last time with the Simon Blackburn book, that he says that it should be about the methodology for finding truth rather than the end product. And then another thing, and then another thing about how the truth, in my belief about the world, how the different parts fit together, and it's got a word for it, but I don't know it now, metonymy or something like that. I don't know. Somebody can comment if they like, but it means taking the part for the whole, so that you see one little thing, and then you say, oh, so that means, and then you get. And this is typically we do with people. I see this a lot on social media. That somebody will say one little thing, and then they will go, "Oh, so you also believe that?"
Right.
So you take the part of the whole, and then you have lost all methodology of truth finding. It's just gone. It's just gone, and it's this. So this is. That's why we need philosophy, and that's why we need so much more philosophy, because people need to like this wanting and this desire to find things out and to use your rationality, your own rationality.
I'm trying to come up with a couple specific virtues maybe that we could say are important then, given this issue of having these communities that are sort of coherent in themselves, but maybe not necessarily justified. And it seems like we can make an argument that regardless of the content of beliefs, there needs to be a sort of meta, an under level here, a couple virtues. Maybe one of them is, when I use the word epistemic, I mean dealing with knowledge. Epistemic humility. There needs to be a sense in which we as knowers are always limited, and there's always more beyond us that can be known, and that I think we could even say ought to be known. That's a really, I think, important virtue to talk about. But then I was also, when you were talking, Miriam and Josh, I was thinking about, I don't know what we could call it, maybe epistemic hospitality. The idea of hospitality. I mean, if we think about hospitality in the sense of inviting people to come home to you, for example, you're going to make them a dinner and serve them dinner. The idea of inviting other epistemic categories and other viewpoints, inviting them in, being hospitable to them. I think that goes hand in hand with the virtue of humility. But
and charitability, to have a charitable interpretation, and to ask many times, really, what do you mean? What do you mean? Do you mean like this? Did I understand you correctly? Etc. etc. And this with the hospitality, it never means, when you have guests, it never means that the people you invite, you will become like. I mean, it doesn't work like that. You are still your own sovereign person, and you can
anyone who's had Thanksgiving dinner with their family knows that that's not the case, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, maybe one I like both all those suggestions. Maybe one other virtue that is relevant is something like, it's a tricky word, but maybe you say something like respect for truth, or like respect for process of truth. Like so wanting to know. It's like you see a statement that maybe you feel an automatic sort of agreement with, like I don't know, Sweden is awesome, right? And you're like, yeah, just because we all live in Sweden, so yeah. But like maybe you see it, right? But so maybe there's like a respect for truth, or a respect for the process of truth would be a kind of like that humility idea that you say, well, I feel like this is probably true, but then wanting to sort of see the process, right? A respect for the process of how it's developed,
and looking in the same direction, so that you're not like, this isn't what we're doing now, going head to head, but we're like, where do we want to see? We want to see in this. We want to see the wisdom of things. We want to find the truth, and we do it together. So that's the method, and the looking in the same direction. See. Yeah.
And that shouldn't be too controversial to the statement that we are fallible beings, that we are incomplete, that we don't have the complete understanding of anything.
But it's not controversial. But if you think about the rhetoric or the language that gets used in terms of talking about a post-truth society, part of like what I take to be what that means is we can define truth according to power or control. So our group, whatever our group is, if we can control the way that this works, then we've got the ability to steer things. So and the idea is that truth then sort of recedes. It's secondary, because it's not as important as being able to either manipulate, maybe is the wrong word, but being able to convince people in a certain direction. Because once you can do that, then that's all you need. You don't need to worry about the truth aspect.
Right.
But you can never convince people like that. People who are philosophers at heart, you know. Yeah. People who are still looking for the truth will never be convinced by these things. They will never accept the dogma and the answer without questions. You should always love the questions more than the answers, right? And to keep. What do you think, Matt?
Keep going.
Yeah. No, keep going. Yeah, keep going, Miriam. I'm just thinking here. You guys got me on a totally different track, but yeah, keep going.
yeah, but I mean, if we, like, I am this person who I want to know that I mean, okay, I'm sidetracking a little bit now, but I remember from very long ago when I was a child, 100 years ago or more.
Wow, 100 years! Wow,
yeah, keeping youthful. But so people, and I was accused by peers of like, why don't you? Whose side are you on? They would say, whose side? Aren't you on my side? Why did you say that? Or something. Yeah, and I remember thinking, what do you mean? Like, I'm not on anyone's. I'm not on anyone's side like that. I'm on the side of like the right thing, or like the best outcome, or like finding out okay, I'm sounding a little bit holy now maybe, but I really remember not being able to respond when my friends said, whose side are you on, and it says something, I guess.
That's a good like micro illustration of kind of like tribalism or this sort of this post-truth sort of idea that there's like these groups, right? And the idea is that it's like, it's about sides, not so much about what's true. It's more about being on sides. So whose side are you on is like the core question. That's the core thing. And then you sort of develop a whole truth narrative on top of what side you're on. And that's although now we've strayed quite a long ways away from the original questions, but that's totally fine. I mean, I think these are all connected, right? I mean, they're connected to these same issues.
Let me needs to come out. Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
Let me throw this in here, and then this will take us in a totally different direction, maybe. But when you guys were talking, I was thinking about we talked about the overlap of epistemology, so the philosophy of knowledge, and ethics or morality in terms of this ought to believe. And I'm thinking about maybe there's, in fact, a really important connection between epistemology, the philosophy of knowledge, and aesthetics, the philosophy of art, or the philosophy of beauty. And where I'm getting to is with this. When we talk about these groups, my Facebook group where I have these internally consistent beliefs, and what that does is it forces me then to essentially either dismiss counter evidence to my view, or come up with explanations where I can take counter evidence and then reframe it in a way that fits into my little circle of knowledge. And I'm wondering if, thinking about conspiracy theories, because it is kind of similar to conspiracy theories, the way that works, the way we deal with counterexamples, and the way that we try to incorporate knowledge within a system. If we come to a point in which we can say, aesthetically speaking, that belief system or theory becomes less beautiful or less elegant. The scaffolding that we have to build up in order to either deal with counterexamples, counter evidence, or to incorporate them becomes so, I guess, distorted and twisted and in some sense ugly. It loses the elegance to it that would lead us in a direction of saying that perhaps the better theory, the better worldview is one in which we can incorporate these examples without all of this ugly scaffolding.
Yeah.
And in that sense, maybe there's an aesthetic element here, not just a moral element at play in how we talk about beliefs and our belief systems and what we do with them, why they're justified.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about that?
Wow.
Occam, I mean, it sounds a little bit like Occam's razor, right? Like this idea that if you've got, if that thing, the simplest explanation is probably the true explanation. So if you have,
don't increase entities beyond necessity.
Yeah, don't increase entities beyond necessity. So don't have lots of extra things if you can explain it in a more simplistic, i.e. beautiful. And there's definitely a sense of that. I mean, that's certainly the way that a lot of theoretical physics works, right?
Yeah.
If you can explain it with a simpler formula, then that's taken to be evidence that it is probably true.
Right. Mathematicians also, there's a sense, there's a beauty in these simpler, clearer formulae.
It's like music, they say, like mathematics is like music, it's music. So there is it's a lovely connection to say that epistemology has an aesthetic point. I think I'm going to think about that for the rest of the week.
But maybe not. I mean, not necessarily. That's where we need to be careful. There can be very beautifully coherent systems, and this is as a Kierkegaardian scholar. This is where I want to sort of pull back and say, just because something is a beautiful system doesn't mean it's also therefore true. I mean, this is much of Kierkegaard's response to the 19th century systematizers. They came up with these great systems, but they don't map onto existence, because existence is still kind of this messy, not altogether tied together, round corners kind of thing. We still kind of struggle our way through existence. In that sense, I think we need to be careful how we talk about aesthetics and truth, because I don't think
of course, it's an investigation and an inquiry to look in that direction. Yeah. But I wanted to say that messy and complex, yes, absolutely. But it can be, you can have a clarity in your vision. And this clarity is the beauty, when the clouds are gone, and you can see what you're looking at, that's it. And that's a very complex and complicated and multifaceted simplicity. See, so simple doesn't mean simple isn't that simple.
Simple isn't that simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Simple's not simplistic, maybe.
Yeah.
Right.
simple's not simplistic. Yeah.
The same as, with when you say we're all one, like this statement, it obviously doesn't mean that there is no difference between people or no individuality, etc. So in the same way, the simplicity is simple and clear isn't uncomplicated, or
Right.
Maybe that was completely obvious to everyone. Just wanted to put it out there.
That's good. So maybe that's a good place to round this off a bit, or try to round this off. We could sort of try and say what. So we started with these three different statements that seem to be true, right? But don't hang together. The first one being that we should believe what is true, or if something is true, we should believe it. Or if we have justified epistemic justification for something, we should assent. We should believe something. So that seems we've talked a lot about that. That seems to be the case. And then we also talked about if some ought implies can. So if you should do something, then you if we can say that you should do something, you should have the capability of doing it.
Yeah. And
then the last one was that we don't seem to have voluntary control over our beliefs, and we didn't touch on that so much, but maybe we did a little bit in this way, that it's not so simple, and that there are more ways in which beliefs are both situated and generated. But what could be our last? How could we sort of sum this up, and our last thoughts on it?
It's about the beliefs and the connection between belief and truth, true beliefs and believing what's true. This is like the question. If we can find the key to that door.
That would be nice to be. Yeah, that's good.
I mean, for me, I guess, as a last word, I think this opens up, as always, a lot more questions, particularly when we're talking about control, and we're talking about ought in a moral sense.
Yep.
What is it that is behind these concepts and these ideas that we need to unpack in order to really understand what it means to say that I can or cannot control my beliefs in this respect, or that I ought in a moral sense to believe these things.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more layers there that we could unpack another time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. we'll do some more next time. We've got lots of ideas, so more is coming.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this Life.Examined Skype session, and we look forward to seeing you all back here in the future again. Thank you from us.